What are you telling people, and tell our audience and educate us as well, the power of the carbohydrate, what carbohydrates are for, why we need them, why it's a critical component to a healthy, energy producing whole foods plant-based diet?
And
Yeah.
why they won't lead to weight gain if they're
Yeah.
not all of them will lead to weight gain.
Yeah, it's something that we have in our culture, don't we? And it's something that we have all taken in over the years, this idea of, oh, if I want to lose weight, I'll just cut the carbs. And you see it in so many different magazines and online, but it's hard to define that, like what it really means, because when people cut the carbs, they think, oh, well, I'll just cut out bread or potatoes. But actually, as you've pointed out, carbohydrates are an integral part of a diet that can help you feel energized and is actually part of dietary guidelines to consume, carbohydrate rich foods. They contain the glucose, which is the brain's primary energy source.
Yeah.
So, we do need carbohydrates, of course, and even vegetables. Vegetables are carbohydrate rich. Carbohydrates are not just things like, bread. So it's a really difficult thing to explain for people who have taken in that kind of hum that, oh, low carb is good, because actually, when you look at epidemiological data, low carbohydrate diets are associated with higher all-cause mortality. And that's because looking at what people are actually eating, people tend to use animal proteins over plant proteins when they are maximizing their protein intake and minimizing their carbohydrate intake, which does lead to long-term health risks when you look at large populations of people over long periods of time. There's no denying that. There's lots of different studies that have shown this, meta-analyses as well, that have shown that this is the case. And so we have to think about our long-term health, and which is why it worries me when I see that low carbohydrate diets are so popular for instant sort of weight loss, because actually when you look at how people lose weight, there isn't a great deal of difference between those who are eating a low carbohydrate diet and those who are eating a healthy, more of a whole foods diet with plants in. You're not seeing big differences in their ability to lose weight. It's about the same, certainly in the short term, but then you have to also look at long-term health and what you're consuming and how that relates to cancer risk, for example, how that relates to heart disease risk, our biggest killer in the Western world. And these are really important questions that I think it does a disservice to people when they don't understand that having a low carbohydrate lifestyle could well increase their long-term heart health risks. And so what I would always really emphasize to people is that it's possible to lose weight with a diet where you're taking in less energy. And in order to do that in a way where you're not constantly hungry, it's actually a lovely idea to be full of fiber-rich foods, because these fiber-rich foods are able to fill up your tummy nicely. You can produce hormones of satiety that make you feel full for longer. And of course, protein is important, but if you emphasize plant proteins, you're also improving your likelihood of long-term longevity and health, which is clearly very important to most people. So yeah, I would suggest plant proteins to be emphasized. I would suggest when you're having carbohydrate rich foods, then whole grains are great. And of course, fruits and vegetables also contain carbohydrates, and nuts and seeds also contain carbohydrates. Of course, they are fat rich and protein rich too, which is great, the right kinds of fats as well. But yeah, I think it's just so important to emphasize whole plant foods, and you're not going to necessarily notice any weight changes unless your energy intake has shifted. And so most people do find that if they make a big shift in their intake of plant foods, they tend to lose weight because they've got more fiber to keep them full. That's not the case for everybody, and not everybody wants to lose weight, in which case, you tend to want to emphasize making sure that you have, maybe protein rich smoothies or things in between your meals, if that's the case for you. So it really depends on the person.
You yourself, as Dotsie mentioned, went on a lot of low carb diets and you lost weight, but you had other effects that you didn't like that also opened you up to a plant-based diet. Can you share with us what happened when you went on those low carb diets, and then when you went in terms of your physical health and weight, and what happened when you went on a plant-based diet?
Yeah, I'd love to share. Thank you for asking. And, for me, I was in my 20s at the time, and I hadn't done a great deal of research into nutrition at that point in my career, but I was working tremendously hard. And, I wasn't looking after my own health particularly. I don't think many junior doctors do. And I just used to grab whatever I could when I could. And I felt so lethargic. I was exhausted. I'd get home from a long shift at the hospital and I could barely keep my eyes open at the dinner table. And I thought to myself, this is not right. I am in my 20s. I want to do this job. I want to be a doctor until I'm in my 60s, 70s, whenever. I didn't want to feel this way. So I decided to emphasize my health then. And I took in that background hum of, oh, low carb works. So I cut the carbs. I had chicken and fish and salads, and that was pretty boring, if I'm honest, because that's pretty much what I stuck with most of the time during that time. And, it worked to improve my energy levels. And yes, I also lost weight. So I felt pleased. But when I checked my blood profile, I noticed that I had a raised cholesterol. And this surprised me, given the fact that I was so young. And also, I was aware that my grandfather on my father's side died young of a heart attack. He was playing tennis. He was just generally quite healthy. Unbeknownst to me, he obviously had heart disease going on internally. And he was playing tennis. And then one minute he just dropped dead and he'd had a big heart attack. And he was 61 at the time. And I didn't realize it back then. But unfortunately, years later, my father was also going to suffer the same fate. He suddenly died of a heart attack, age 59. And it was not something that, he hadn't been unwell beforehand. He hadn't had any previous problems. So I was quite aware that that might also be something that I would be prone to. But at the time, I didn't really think there was anything I could do about that. So fast forward a few years, and then I decided to try a plant-based diet myself. And it was a wonderful revelation because I began to realize when I checked my blood levels after eating this way that I was able to actually, for the first time in my life, have a normal lipid profile, which was wonderful because I knew that lipid profiles are a marker of risk of cardiovascular disease. So I felt really happy that I'd actually been able to address that risk in a way through my diet that I'd never imagined before. And another nice side effect that I hadn't been aware of as well was that I was running through my 20s and I needed big knee supports on both knees because I get terrible knee ache when I was running. And, I'm in my 40s now and I go for runs and I've never needed knee supports, not since I went plant-based, certainly not in the last 10 years. So I feel as though, obviously that's an anecdote, that's my story, but I really feel as though that's made a big difference for me in my life. And it's nice to be able to share those important differences, I think.